we talk about technology, we talk about the finance, we don't talk about the infrastructure that is needed to get us there. Technology is data. Data needs to be hosted and stored somewhere. And at this scale that we're going at now, when it comes to implementing more and more technologies and more innovations, we need to be thinking about that critical infrastructure.
Catalina, welcome to the Oxford Talks pod. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Not too bad. For the folks who are not familiar with your work and who don't know what you do, what is it that you do?
Good question. The easiest way to describe it is smart cities. So I run a company which essentially focuses on deploying smart cities, whether that be through technology and the data-led approach, finance, and various other aspects of what a smart city needs to make it smart. So that's what we do, and there are various different touch points, things that you need across energy, or if you need to look at infrastructure. We need to look at social and health, mobility. There's so many different parts and components to smart cities, which we obviously address through our various ventures.
Amazing. And I want to go back. So how did you get involved in all? Because that is a mega project. It's not something a singular entrepreneur sort of conjures up in their head that I'm gonna, go towards the smart city. Because again, there are millions of people it touches upon that idea. What was the starting journey? When you decided, okay, this is something worth spending my time over? When was that?
That's a good question. I would say, so I'd started my first company, and then I ended up meeting my current co-founder. He was already, deploying net zero buildings at scale. He'd built one of the highest performing buildings in the world and built a successful company. And we met, and I started venturing more into sustainability, just sustainability in general. And then we ended up creating Elixir, which essentially was very different to begin with, as companies usually are. You kind of start, you iterate, and then you kind of carry on going. And then I guess from there we built sort of, each of these individual companies, some which were pre-Elixir, some which are currently deployed and developed by Elixir. And that kind of led me to where I am, I guess. I mean, it wasn't intentional. It was very much accidental. But I think that when you're on a journey and when you've created sort of a path for yourself, you end up figuring out where it is that you want to go. And then you kind of come across various different things that you enjoy. And then eventually you fall into the right one. And I think that I've finally found my one.
That's amazing. And talking about the corporate structure, so do you want to tell the viewers and listeners, like, if I'm not wrong, there are 4 companies within the Elixir kind of group. Do you want to tell us more about what they do, what the names of them are, and how they're operating?
Yeah, absolutely. So currently we have 4 companies, as you said, within the ecosystem. We have a 5th one in development this year. I will start with MetaConnects because I think that's the easiest one to digest. Essentially, MetaConnects is a master planning tool and company. So we have various projects which we are working with different councils in the UK, various entities, which essentially will plan out a city strategically. So it's not just looking at one piece of land and the uplift of that. It's how do all of these different parcels of land impact one another to create an actual place worth living in. And a good example of that is King's Cross, Canary Wharf. They've done a really good job with being places that people want to be in. A lot of that being through mixed use developments and various other things. And so what MetaConnects does is essentially helps with that strategic and brings it right through to construction with some of our construction partners. We have just signed an MOU with Pinsent Masons, a global law firm, through Elixir and MetaConnects. It was like a tri-party MOU. And what that does is it allows us to have a partner now to look at the legal procurement and all of the other things that are entailed with the master planning, with the construction, with all these different layers that you have to adhere to when it comes to development and things like that. So MetaConnects focuses really on the buildings and the sort of new developments, I would say. Then there's Sens within the ecosystem. Sens is a retrofit technology company. So we've looked at new assets and how we build those with MetaConnects, now we look at existing assets and how we improve the current infrastructure that we have. And so Sens is a pre and post retrofit assessment tool. Essentially, it's a software company. You have a little app on your phone, point to point measurement, which you can do in any room. You take probably a few minutes just
Like a
to
3D map? It
yeah.
creates, yeah.
I mean, you have the Measure app on your phone. It's very similar to that. Essentially, you just point to all the corners of the room and it takes in the measurements, it takes in the materials, and that paired with other data sets that we have, for example, with ArcLive and the sensors. ArcLive, you then install the little sensors into each room. The sensor will take in various readings from temperature and pressure and humidity and all of these different things, which then can help us to inform an accurate retrofit. So what exactly is wrong with the asset? Because you find a lot of times people are guessing. People will go in and sort of, obviously people who are very qualified, don't get me wrong, but we can't tell what's wrong with a house as much as the data can, because you have heat mapping tools and various things like that. So the data will essentially inform retrofits, as well as other things as well, with regards to energy savings, and paired with batteries and various other things like microgrids, we can essentially reduce energy consumption, but also optimize it and optimize the grid. So those three technologies now, or those three companies, if you look at those now, we've looked at existing infrastructure and existing assets with Sens and with ArcLive and the energy. We've also then looked at the new building and developments with MetaConnex. But what's missing? Well, we have a lot missing, because that's only the starting point, right? And so that's why we've developed a series of other companies which are going to be coming online, which we have steps coming online to finance these things, because a lot of issues that we have within development is the pre-development loan. So who's going to pay for that? Because the banks are willing to finance as long as there's somebody securing the first bit of capital in a lot of instances. And so what Steps is planning to do is to bridge that gap, essentially, and act as the pre-development finance partner. And then we have banking institutions who are partnered with us, who will then finance the rest. And so Steps will act as a key enabler for that, potentially issuing bonds, which we're working on at the moment. We've got some fantastic people. James McIntyre, who sits on our board, he developed huge bonds in the US, close to $1 billion, I believe, but don't quote me on that. And he's developed huge bond programs. So he's working with us on Steps and various other entities to deploy that. We do also have a nonprofit called the Live Data Trust that is co-funded by the UK government through the Innovate UK programs. Essentially what that does is it allows institutions and public and private sector to share data. So a lot of the times now, people need to share data, especially when we're looking at the built environment, or we're looking at health, or we're looking at all sorts of different components that make up our country. Data sharing is very important, because with more data or missing data sets that we have, we can obviously enable different things. So if we have, an asset, for example, where this party has this level of data, and these guys over here maybe have like the energy data or something. But if these guys, worked together, then you could share that data and enrich both sides, and then, better outcomes for that asset. And so a lot of the times people are just emailing CSV files with very highly confidential data. And so data security is a hugely important thing, as we all know. And so that's why we created the Live Data Trust, to act as a data enabler. And that is coming online over the next few months. We've done some good projects. It's one of our newer companies, hence its earlier stages, and potentially looking at data centers after that.
Amazing. How does work managing all these?
Well, we
The
actually
time management must be off the charts.
It is. I have definitely learnt the hard way how to manage my time, but we do also have some executives who lead each company. So we have some fantastic executives in MetaConnex, for example. We have the previous head of master planning at WSP, who's our MD of placemaking. We have the previous global head of BRIAM and executive director of the NHS Property Services, who's helping us to run MetaConnex at the moment in his spare time. We have, who else do we have? We have some fantastic partners at Pinsent Masons. We have some partners which I probably shouldn't disclose, but I will disclose at some point. We have some new announcements coming over the next few months or so with some very big construction partners.
That's amazing. Going back to earlier in life, I think you if I'm not wrong, you finished your master's at 19 and you had your bachelor's done at 16. So you were in the entrepreneurial world right after that. You even mentioned, I think you bought your house at a very early age as well. So how does it work that, because for let's say for a lot of people, I think young entrepreneurs is definitely a thing that that you can see, like a lot of people, young folks are might be getting into entrepreneurship, but the successful ones are tend to be more, let's say, a bit later, 28, 39, 30 afterwards, because once you get into a field, you have a bit of an experience and do that. How do you sort of look into that, where straight out of uni, you had some companies before, I think you mentioned like the six-figure business, you had some investors onwards, and straight away you were in the big game of the entrepreneurship. Did you feel like you had all the tools mentally and entrepreneurially to sort of tackle all of that, or you're still kind of learning on the job, let's say, like managing different projects and different sort of sectors?
I think everyone will agree that you're always learning on the job. Even some of the investors that we have who are 60 odd, still are learning on the job. So I don't think anyone's ever prepared, which is always reassuring. But to answer your earlier question, I started my bachelor's at 16 and my master's at 19, but those were all online and digitally. So I was working from the age of 16 and upwards of that. And so I was kind of balancing work life and studying in my sort of spare time when I got back from work. And so I was I think that work life really prepared me quite a lot.
Mm.
Because I mean, even just learning basic business things such as different departments, I mean, you don't know that coming out of school. You don't know there's a marketing team, an admin team, an operations team, sales team. You don't know these things.
Yeah.
And also getting comfortable with talking to people. Because I was actually quite nervous, quite shy when I was younger. And so I wasn't always, confident enough to sort of start conversations with people. And so I was really thrown into the deep end, going to start to work with, grown adults, really. And I was very young. So I think that definitely helped a lot. With regards to sort of where I am in terms of right now in my journey with the skills and the tools, I would say definitely learning every day. Um, and I kind of look back even on like a monthly basis. I'm like, wow, I've learned so much this month, and I feel more capable each time.
Like keeping like a log of your learnings.
Basically, yeah, like a mental log, because you do need it, and it's really reassuring. And I always think, okay, where will I be in a year's time? Because look at what I've done in the last year. And what I think is really essential, and it sounds so obvious because people always talk about it, but always educating yourself.
Mm.
Now, I've seen people who will just go to work and then come out of work and that's it. But if you want to progress, you have to be continuously educating yourself to continue to show value. Because if you just stop here, then you're just kind of doing the same stuff every day. But if you want to be here, well, there's a gap. And so you have to fill that gap with knowledge. And so that's what I'm always doing, and what a lot of people around me are always doing. I will do online courses left, right, and center when I can. And don't get me wrong, I don't always finish them, but eventually I will finish them.
Do you have on your what platform are you using for learning?
Do I what, sorry?
Which platform are you using for learning? Because there are quite like few big ones which do enrolling.
I use a lot of different ones, to be honest with you. I used to use Read courses, which were good.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're very accessible, very affordable. I mean, you can get some for free, some for £10, really just educating yourself on a micro basis. If you want more certified courses, and they do offer more expensive courses, of course. But to be honest with you, I mean, even the small courses, I mean, I paid, it was like £200 or something, which is, I'd say mid-tier when it comes to courses, because
Yeah.
there's like £2,000 or £10,000 and you've got the free ones. So it's a fairly affordable.
Spectrum, big
Yeah,
spectrum.
I mean, it's definitely not, yeah, but yeah, on the spectrum, it's somewhere in the middle. And that was one of the best courses I think I ever took. It was EDGE, which is a green building certification qualification, similar to LEED and BREEAM, but EDGE is more for emerging nations, and I think it's kind of got that new aspect. It was developed by the World Bank. That was a fantastic course for me. That was just excellent, and I would recommend that to anybody who wants to come into sustainability or anything to do with smart cities or technology, data, etc. I would highly recommend that course. But I do a lot of different courses, Read courses. I've done actual courses with universities. I've done online degrees, which I could not recommend more. Honestly,
Saves time.
yes, it really does. I mean, going into a university for 3 years, it takes a lot of time. And if you're prepared to do that, then great. But if you want to get a kickstart on your career, which is what I did, I had 3 years ahead of all of my peers because I was already working for 3 years and kind of got rid of all that sort of junior basic foundational learning out of the way whilst doing the course. So I think
Yeah.
that that's really important if you do want to kickstart.
I want to come back to MetaConnects because personally, when I was looking at the work you're doing, that to me felt like very connecting because creating digital twins of cities,
Yep.
that's just such a remarkable yet such a hard task. I mean, where does one even start? Can you walk us through a journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So we will engage with councils if we're talking about the UK. Obviously, if we're talking about others, then it'll be state by state or whatever else. But in the UK, we approach councils or we discuss with councils. We've been working with Bolton, for example, just outside of Greater Manchester. And we will discuss an opportunity. So councils which have land opportunities are prime for that.
What does that mean?
So if they own land, then that's a great opportunity because the way that we work, we offer this for free to councils because we want to enable councils because councils that we've selected, for example, which are prime for uplift and value and regeneration, don't always have the capital to do so. And so obviously these councils want to get to here, but they can't because they're lacking, maybe skills or capacity or finance. So all of
Yeah.
these things we can bring to the table. And so, as I said, we have these fantastic people around the board and around the table, including extra partners outside of just our executive team. And so what we'll do is we'll first of all approach them, obviously check the viability, et cetera, et cetera. With our tool, we'll then start to look at different parcels of land and with our team who are experts in this. And what we'll do is we'll start to select the right parcels of land for regeneration in our platform, in the MetaConnects platform, and then start to build a bit of a master plan, essentially, which is what a lot of councils do, what all councils do, in fact, is build a master plan to then start to sort of strategize. And there's obviously some people will own different pieces of land. The council might own some of those, and then we'll start to look at those for regeneration or to buy and purchase with financial partners or with steps in future. And so that's the really.
So it's not like you start with just a small piece rather than going in and literally creating like a digital 3D map of the whole city itself.
We actually already have a digital twin of the whole world. So we've got that in our platform. We have an overlay of different data sets, including CCM and Google APIs and things like that. So that's a very good foundation for us to go, okay, so we can see everything with accuracy because we're using existing data. So that's fine. What actually happens, where the magic is in the actual master planning. So selecting, say, 10 sites, for example, that's billions in regeneration. And so the digital twin aspect will then take place when we actually go to create and sort of check whether these things are viable. So we'll then model it within our platform, essentially, and what could
And
be.
does it do automatic modeling, or you are sort of, or the team is essentially sort of looking into it, like, or the model needs to sort of reflect this particular insight?
It's automatic. Yeah.
Okay. So just get it and you run it through the model and it just creates the whole thing for you then.
Yes, sort of. So you kind of say, this is what I want. And then as if you make it a tiny bit bigger, it will tell you how, the costs will rise or decrease.
Oh, it'll tell
or whatever.
you the cost as well.
Yeah, so it's a viability appraisal tool as well, which is very much, I'd say 5-10 years ahead of the market. A lot of people are doing digital twins on a small scale. What we have obviously is completely, I think it's one of our most complex companies. But what this will do essentially is, obviously, as you start to, if you say, I want to make this a couple of extra stories higher, or I want to do this, or I want to do that with it, then it will sort of automatically adjust according to whatever you've put in, which is great. And that's why we've got other partners coming on board as well, or due to be signed this week, who will then be able to cost that and make sure that it's a viable part of the plan. Because a lot of people go in, make pretty designs, and then they start there, and then they check if it's viable. So we kind of go, well, we need to see what's viable first, and then we'll make it look pretty.
Catalina, can I imagine a future where this data would be extrapolated to even further extend that. Just like Google Maps is an availability that everyone more or less has, that you can be anywhere in the world just with an Android or any phone. You can an internet connection. You can see how the world looks more or less, but we don't get the kind of like a city-based data. Like um, perhaps there's a central part of, let's say London. What's the sort of how the buildings are producing energy, how they're consuming the energy. Are there solar panels installed? So the energy output. I'm saying this because as I was going through the visuals on your website, and it felt like, and that would be quite cool if it's like, I don't know if there's any equivalent I can immediately think of in the. Um, I think the closest and the super vaguest kind of thing I remember is the parking space. Maybe when you go into parking on like a kind of a new shopping center or something, they'll tell you which spaces are available and how many of them are, and they just kind of guide you through, which is a great structure as for self-driving cars. Let's say they would come in, that data is already available, bay number 57, so they'll know, okay, let's just go there, and it saves them going up and down like 7 hours. So that kind of, I feel like that kind of data is going to be really useful again as for future planning and all of those things. How realistic it is it still available, or this is something of like a utopian future?
I think that would be fantastic. The only issue that when it comes to that is who owns the data. So this is where a lot
What
of
if, so let's say it's councils, or let's say the government?
yes, but again, ownership. So if, this asset, for example, this room that we're in, if it's owned by whoever owns the land, but then also you as the user, sorry, owns the property, but then you as the user here also has rights to your data, then you'll own parts of that, then the actual landlord might own parts of that, and the council doesn't have any right to that. And so data ownership is a big question mark around that. And maybe there's a future where, if we're looking at this, for example, from MetaConnect's point of view, and we've got master plans and the council's involved in all of these projects, then maybe there's sort of like, involving a process where the council might then have access to some of this data for the benefits of, the community. So maybe that is an opportunity in future. I don't know how likely that is for now, because that would have to start scaling up. There's not really a foundation for
Yeah.
that, but I'd like to see that.
I guess maybe perhaps you're right in a sense that, because let's say from my house, like from my apartment, the energy usage and all of that data is already available with, let's say, an energy company, and I actually can log into a dashboard and see what's going on. But that necessarily is not really private, but the aggregate is private, where if someone wants, they can be like, okay, this building with 40 apartments is generating this much energy, which is slight anonymous. You can make the data slightly anonymized and then drive insights. I would say that should be okay in terms of data privacy, right?
Yes, there is still a big question mark, but as long as it's not personalized data, there are things that you can sort of get around to sort of benefit the users more. But it's such a big question mark for even, if you're financing against these things. Not everybody's as open as you, for example. Not everybody wants to share their data.
Really? Would you think so? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
happy to share I would say that, isn't that roughly already known that how much this building is kind of
But only by your energy company, not everybody else. Then you have to access to everybody and give it to the public domain, for example, which, by the way, I have an Alexa in my house which listens to everything I do, which is fine, and loads of people do, but then they come to, looking at things like this, and honestly, not everybody is open to it. And so when we go into
really.
houses, we have to give, they have to give consent to it and everything. So it's not as simple as that. I'd like it to be. And maybe there is an approach where, you give X amount of data to the council for benefits of X, Y, Z. I think that could be smart. Maybe there's some sort of reduction around council tax or something if you're giving data, or I don't know what there could be, some sort of incentives, for example. I don't know, but I think that could be, in like you said, looking on the website in a
Yeah.
great world, then that would be fantastic to know everything, because then you could go, right, I can optimize this over here. We can make your lives better for that. But unfortunately, even though we go in with great intentions, not everybody thinks that way.
Karina, walk me through a utopian future, which you very much like to be a reality. So, data and energy, something we talked about. What other things that we are kind of within our grasp in a smart city. And I absolutely genuinely with all my heart and body want to live in a smart city. And I don't know I would love for you to kind of walk me through the implications of it, that especially the data one, like who owns it, what kind of, and further to that, if that data is generating some insights and those insights are being actioned upon positively or negatively, how the community of that kind of smart city would feel like that. So, but first of all, I would love from hear from you that what other things we can expect, at least in UK, that are coming our way in terms of smart cities.
Good question. I would say free transport is something I'd like to see. Free, I'd say good healthcare and good and free education. Those three things would see a huge economic benefit to the country and well-being of the citizens. I would say transport is something that we're looking into. We've been looking at some eVTOLs, e-copters, which are sort of flying air taxis essentially, which are being worked on in Dubai. I think there's some projects going on in Saudi Arabia. I'm not too sure, but I definitely know a lot of innovations going towards Dubai at the moment, and a lot of innovations coming out of Europe. I would like to see a smarter infrastructure system because a lot of money, especially in the UK economy, is based on the tax system. I would like to see the UK economy transition to more of a real estate and ownership position. So if they could make money on uplift in land or real estate or rental income, for example, or things like that, that would be smart because then ultimately you can find strategic ways around that. For example, if we're looking at mobility and we're looking at air taxis, if you own pieces of land or if you own different things around air mobility infrastructure, you can then provide this service free of charge, hypothetically, and bundle it in with other things. For example, if you, I don't know, if you had, for example, there's like a group of apartments that you have, and one of the air taxis goes through it, for example, then you have you see that there's some that have like amenities, so they have like a pool, it's a gym or whatever else. I don't see why free transport couldn't be included in something like that, if you're looking at it holistically.
All forms of free transport, like air and or just within the city.
Well, I can't speak for all transport industries, but if we're looking at creating a new one, then we can create a new system for that. I would like to see trains and things like that become free of charge. If you own infrastructure and you find other ways to monetize, is what I'm saying essentially, then that should be an option.
So how would it work? I love the idea of it. Just want to go through like a mental exercise that, let's say a train that you mentioned, and it's, let's say London doesn't have any train, and we're coming up with a sort of transport system. Can you walk me through mentally what would be that step that you think that can lead to having a free transport? Because I think an idea like this should be heard by the politicians and people, the policymakers, I guess.
I agree, yeah, and we do have several on our board who are pushing a lot of things through, which I think is great. Um, I would say I just think that the easiest way, whether that be transportation, whether that be any other industry, is to look at alternative business models. I think everybody looks for the easiest business model
Hmm.
opportunity. Okay, let's tax them on this, or let's parking charges or whatever else that might be. That's a way that then eventually reduces the social outcomes. And people then have to pay for extra things and this, and then there's less money to be spent over here, and then the spend goes down, and all these other things that impact it. But if we could look at other business models, I think the best way I can describe it is our nonprofit, the Live Data Trust. We are a platform. We do also have other ways of monetizing, but what most people would do is charge a membership fee, which is like a few £1,000s a year for companies to use the platform, whatever else. And then you have different user types that will maybe charge different things. And it's just more of like a SaaS base or a recurring revenue. What we're doing is we're saying, well, this data needs to be hosted somewhere. Let's create data infrastructure. Let's purchase data centers and create a data center model, because that will turn X million of pounds a year on the data centers, which can then support the company and growth. And obviously the data needs to be stored somewhere anyways. And so If we look at that and we look at critical infrastructure, if we look at real estate opportunities, we look at other ways of monetizing or creating business models, that's a much smarter approach. Instead of charging our customers, we, find another way of monetizing. And I think that that's something we could
Who
do
would
with
pay eventually?
who would pay eventually.
Yeah.
Well, the users aren't paying anything.
Yes.
We have customers who need to store data. So people would be paying for us to use our data centers, and they would need to use other data centers regardless. So everyone wins.
And that's linked with the transport.
So that's an example I was trying to give to sort of show a different type of business model, because a lot of people would charge, subscription based or membership based opportunities, whereas we've gone,
Yeah.
have our platform for free, and then we monetize somewhere else. And I think that if we're looking at transport, we're looking at anything else, we can say, let's monetize here on, owning infrastructure or owning real estate or land, whatever. And then, offer this thing over here for free.
Yeah, because I mean, especially with transport, I'm imagining the train scenario I mentioned to you that, yeah, potential way would be to advertise, use it as like a advertising space, but it's already being used as an advertising space, and still on top consumers are paying as well. So they are making a lot of money, but the infrastructure, I'm assuming, I think infrastructure management costs are quite high. Um, so yeah, I think that would be an interesting scenario. I think transport is a huge one. I think
I think it
it
is.
drains a lot of capital, moving atoms around countries. And if it somehow becomes free, I think that would be an amazing world to live in.
I think it would be. I think we're still far off from it, but I think it's something that if we start thinking strategically, like what I was talking about with different business models, I think that could be a game changer.
Amazing. Tell me about what, without sort of going too much into the future of like things you mentioned that you're going to be looking into. Is this going to be a sort of aggregation of things that we're going to look into, that all the different aspects of the business, they're all kind of coming together, or you see themselves like kind of spinning out and becoming big in their own regard, but there's no kind of like congregation to them?
I think it's more the first idea that you mentioned. Each of our different companies and partners that we work with are addressing different key things and aspects of smart cities. I like to think of it as, like layers. So you have the basic infrastructure level, and, new developments and housing. If we look at that basic level with MetaConnects, and then you build on top of that with things like Sens and ArcLive, which are looking at existing assets, and then you start to layer in energy on top of that, and then you layer in healthcare
Yeah.
or transport or education and all of these things that we need in a country, in a city, and whatever that might be. And so I like to think of them as all coming together, because you need all of these different components. But what historically has happened is each company, each private sector or state-owned types of companies and vehicles are all disjointed. So we have somebody who owns, this transport system over here. Somebody over here is, looking at energy and the infrastructure over here and whatever else, but they're not talking to one another, because this really impacts this over here, and these
Straight away,
all
yeah.
exactly. And so each sort of aspect, industry, whatever you want to call it, impacts the other. And so the reason why we've started to look at all of these separately and individually, but ultimately they have an intersect, is so that we can look at this from a bird's eye view rather than sort of looking across from one another. And we can say, right, this really needs to talk to this over here,
Yeah.
and start to have that more of a wider approach with these things.
That's remarkable. I feel like when do you think that can happen? Because I just feel like the impact of it is just so big, but the amount of stakeholders that need to be convinced to be part of this is just unprecedented. And the inertia of corporations and the bureaucracy, and how do you manage all of that? How do you expect that to, what are the challenges that you're gonna sort of, you feel like they're gonna be continuously be there? And what are the challenges that so far the work you've done, you said yourself, well, actually, I know a way around them, or we have mitigated them, or we have come up with kind of resources or come up with plans that mitigate them. What is the case there?
Good question. And there's definitely a lot of stakeholders you have to convince to deploy something like this. I would say not everybody wants to be a part of the future. There's always, and I always forget the saying, but there's always the first, batch of people who will join and sort of be those innovators and market leaders, and they'll be the ones who follow that, and then the ones who will be the last to follow because they, are so risk adverse. And so, finding the people who are wanting to move things forward, because ultimately these things aren't just forward thinking, but it improves existing business models. I mean, it de-risks things. If you have data in an asset, then you can de-risk lending against it because it's like a black box, right? If you
Hmm.
know exactly how fast a driver is going, a young driver will be going, or whatever that, all of the data that comes with that, you know exactly how to increase or decrease their insurance premium to de-risk yourself. And so the same thing happens with an asset. So you can de-risk a lot of these different products. So banks want to finance against these things and have now. We created the first ever live data linked loan, which is fantastic because historically it's based off of VPCs. But obviously it de-risks them. Now, when it comes to stakeholders and finding the right stakeholders who are ready to do that, I mean, there are various banks that we can approach and have approached and are already working with. Some of them want to be a part of it, some of them don't. But ultimately, there's various different banks that you could approach, and if you find the right ones, then great. Then they are the ones who will lead the way.
But
But
does
I've
it become
also
challenging, Catalina, that at times these are country-based kind of projects? If let's say a bank doesn't want to support things in London, would you think it's an easy conversation for like a Middle Eastern bank to be like, oh yeah, yeah, we might be able to open an investment in London? Do you think that happens, or you kind of just get to reach out to another city, I guess?
I would say, I mean, it's complicated. It's not quite. It doesn't operate like that, but it's more if X bank didn't want to work with us in London, for example, we would just approach Y bank and Z bank, for example,
Hmm.
and we have. And sometimes it's not just the company; it's the person you're talking to in the company.
Yes, that's interesting.
Which is great because then you just approach somebody else in the same organization and they drive it up for you, because some people are very risk adverse, or in some cases they are scared that this will replace them or make more work for them or whatever that might be. And so you've got to speak to the right stakeholder. But coming back to sort of on a country basis, which is what you implying,
Yes.
is very different in each territory, each country. A lot of the Middle East is state-owned assets, which is why we focus on places which obviously have private ownership for MetaConnex, because that's where our business model comes from, and obviously they have already got solutions for that sort of deployment. When it comes to the US, for example, they aren't as focused on sustainability. So you sort of talk about the cost savings to them and the economic benefits. In the UK and Europe, there are huge sustainability mandates.
Hmm.
So selling them on the sustainability really is very attractive. We do projects, obviously, like you said, we don't do sort of country projects yet. We
Hmm.
will obviously scale to that at some point. But we are working with individual councils. And so, when you talk about it in that respect, there are various councils who don't want to do this and implement this, which is funny because we're offering it to them for free. So
Yeah.
I don't know why people would say no, but some people do. They're very risk adverse. And so we're very lucky that we found a number of partners who do want to take that on. And that's just business. Some people will say yes, some people will say no. And those people who say no might come back to you in a few years' time after they see you doing this over here. So I say find the ones who are ready for you and who are ready
Yeah.
to implement that, and then they'll come back later.
And I think that these personal dynamics do come into play. And speaking of that, how's personally for yourself, how's the journey been so far?
Interesting. You
To
have
say
to
the
be
least.
you have to be really ready for it, like really wanting it. It's It depends. I think if you want to scale, a business that will sort of is more consultancy led, and want to do something on your own but also still somewhat secure, I think that that's obviously a totally different business. But if you're looking at the types of businesses that I'm working on, for example, it takes your whole life. You're not you've got to be available 24/7. You've got to be available through the migraines, through the sickness, through the whatever else. And it's just the case. I mean, last night, it's no secret, I've been dealing with a migraine all week, which is awful. If you've ever had one, you can't see anything. Very dizzy and all sorts. And I've had to work through it. I've had to power through it. Don't get me wrong, I took a couple of days where I had to really sit it out, but they're still kind of wearing off all of those side effects. And even just as much as last night, we were with some partners last night, and we were having dinner, and then I went to go on my laptop and do some work at about 9 or 10 o'clock. And I had to keep taking 5-minute breaks to put a little ice pack on my head and then come back to it and close my eyes and all sorts, because I needed to get these things out. And that kind of lifestyle isn't for somebody who just wants to clock in and out. That's the lifestyle that it becomes your life if you want to do something of the scale or what we're doing, for example. But there are different types of businesses. You can start very, very cash generating companies, or other companies in different types. I see a lot of people online. I can't remember what her name is. Cody Sanchez, I want to say. Yeah.
Cody, she owns a lot of, I think, small
She
businesses.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that turns great profit. She does car wash businesses and other things, and
Laundromats, I think.
Yes, exactly. And that's fantastic. I mean, that's turning millions of pounds every year. And so that, I would say, doesn't require that kind of lifestyle as much. Maybe some of her other businesses do. But, talking from my own experience, it definitely has to be something you have to live, breathe, and almost bleed on.
What are the drawbacks to that? Like, do you feel burnout is on the horizon, or you feel like, you know what, I can power through all these things?
I think it's a combination. There are definitely days where you want to give up. And maybe I'd say hours where you want to give up, because you're like, well, why am I doing?
Let's say on a 365 calendar, how many days you want to be like, let's just wrap it up and I want to go home?
That's a good question. I would say at least once a month. I think it was probably more frequent when I first started, but luckily, as you sort of start to scale or you get to a certain point in the companies, you kind of have more things that keep you going, because you have now actually got a company. Whereas in the beginning, I mean, it was almost every day. Honestly.
It's hard, yes, certainly. Because I think with a lot of sort of normal businesses, you have a lot of agency of what you can, what you cannot do, even if it's a regulated business. I do run a regulated business, but regulations are pretty straightforward, as in like, this is what you can do, this is what you cannot do. There's no like, let's do and then we'll see what happens. But when the cost of entry to the world that you are building is just so high, and some of it is regulated, some of it is not regulated, it just becomes a kind of a nightmare. It feels like running a government as a startup, which is insane to think, to be honest.
Yeah, you're right. And it doesn't have to be your life if you don't want it to be, but it doesn't feel like work when you really enjoy it. And that's what I said earlier in the podcast, where we were talking about how I sort of found the thing that I enjoy. If I didn't enjoy this, I probably would have given up the first month. It would feel like hard work. And don't get me wrong, sometimes it does, but I think, when you love something, when you really truly enjoy something, you kind of stick at it, because you know that even the bad days don't feel as bad as they could do if it was something you didn't like.
Yeah. Catalina, I want to ask you, what is that one question that you always wish someone would ask you?
Ooh.
And no one ever does?
I need a second to think about that. That's a really good question. Maybe this question. Give me a second. Obviously, being so young, people question you. And so I really like when people appreciate my intelligence rather than other things. And so, for example, with my posts, even just on LinkedIn, if we're just talking about on a micro perspective, I switched my audience from talking about things that would generate attention around business, for example, because a lot of people can understand and appreciate business, to talking more about smart cities, which is very hard because that's a more niched and less audience attraction. But I've noticed that my engagement has actually now increased because of that, which was wild to me. But I guess people want to know about it, even if they don't know about it and it's not what they do.
Simple
they kind of want to know about it.
Yeah.
And so I really like that, because people are respecting me for my intelligence, which is something that sounds bizarre, but it's something that you don't get a lot as a young woman in business. And everyone has their challenges. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't say it's sort of a victimizing mindset or anything, but it's more of a case of this is just a reality. And so with that reality, I like when people respect me for my intelligence. And I like when I can walk into a meeting room and people already know that I know what I'm talking about. And so I love that when I'm gathered around a table with some of our partners who have worked with me over the last few months, years, days, whatever that might be, they know what I do and they know I do it well and they respect me for it. And I'm speaking to people who are 40, 50, 60 years old, and we are at an equal level in terms of respect. And I like that. And so I don't quite know what the question would be, but I would say that when people respect me for that, that is the biggest compliment that I could ever have.
I think coming back to it, I think question might be why are you doing what you're doing, and why you are the best person to do that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because I think even if you just ask yourself that, let's say myself, why I am the best person to host this conversation, and then you come up with your own answers, and I think then if those answers get projected out, then that question kind of gets negated as, oh, I don't feel myself questioning again, actually. Having said that, we do have a tradition on the podcast that we ask each of our guests that what is that kind of one book that has fundamentally changed the way they think about life, work, business, anything. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking that book, and actually a physical copy or a digital copy, whatever it needs to be, and we're actually going to give it out to someone who's going to connect with your episode. And then afterwards, we're going to make sure that you and them, they can have a conversation. So because with marketing and all of those things, that one might think like, oh, you are such a big shot and everyone is listening to you. But for us, it's really, we want to have that tangible outcome to each and every episode. So connecting with you, with that one person, would make us feel like, oh, we have done our job with this conversation. So what would be that one book? And I must do a bit cautionary. I wouldn't say magazines or a collection of books, because already the budget for buying books has already like been so big, and I'm like, guys, no collections, just one, please.
Okay, I'm glad that you said
no Harry Potter series, please.
It gave me time to think. I would say the book is Surrounded by Idiots by Thomas Erickson. That really changed a lot for me, because essentially it's people psychology. It's understanding different character types based on color profiles. So I think there's 4 different colors: red, yellow, green, blue, and each person is associated with a color, essentially. And sometimes you could be a little bit of a mix, but those colors have different characteristics. So red are more arrogant, but more sort of doers, leaders, but sometimes arrogance can be in there as well. Yellows are very creative. Greens are very good listeners and very good workers, hard workers. Blues are more process and detail oriented. And so when you think about these different people, you can then learn how to communicate with each individual, which I think is super important, because business is people. If you don't know people, you don't know business. And so I think when you learn, okay, you're a yellow or you're a blue or whatever, I know, to tone it down with you, or to excite you, or to be direct with you, and that really helps transferring that into tangible outcomes and
do you do that
business.
every time you meet someone new?
I think it's become more of a natural thing, and I think I have naturally, very luckily, I have good empathy and EQ to understand people. But I did notice that sometimes, when I can't quite get a read on someone, I'm like, okay, that's because you're this color. I know what to do with you.
So you see colors everywhere.
Yes, yeah, like a rainbow.
It's a popular Rolling Stone song as well, isn't it? See the colors everywhere. That's amazing. Any questions that you felt like we should be asking you but we haven't asked, or anything that you wanted to mention that we haven't asked about it?
Yeah, I think a lot of people talk about technology, a lot of people talk about finance and investments. What a lot of people don't talk about is the critical infrastructure, and I think we've touched upon that a bit throughout the podcast. But we talk about technology, we talk about the finance, we don't talk about the infrastructure that is needed to get us there. Technology is data, data needs to be hosted and stored somewhere. And at this scale that we're going at now, when it comes to implementing more and more technologies and more innovations, we need to be thinking about that critical infrastructure. So now we have more technology, now we have more data. Where are we going to be storing all of this? So we need to be thinking about data centers. We need to be thinking about other types of infrastructure, compute. It's no secret that NVIDIA is one of the largest companies in the world. And why? Well, they create chips, they manufacture chips. And what does that do? Well, it makes the world go around because we have technology everywhere. I mean, I'm surrounded by technology right now.
Absolutely.
And so we need to be thinking upwards, I think. And big companies are doing that, but not enough people are. And if we think about this when it comes to business, it's not just thinking about the now, it's thinking about the 5-10 years time, which is what businesses should be doing and what businesses do. And so thinking about then, okay, well, we've now thought about the hosting and where the data is going to be stored. We've now looked at, partnering with a data center provider or whatever that might be. As we now scale with volumes of data, we're also thinking about our manufacturing and our upward supply chains. What happens from there? Well, what about rare earth supplies? So we need to be thinking about the right positioning. Where are we going to be manufacturing or sourcing from? And a lot of people do that with China, because China have the biggest rare earth supply. They have like 80-90% of the market, which is crazy. It's almost a monopoly, really. And Australia and Brazil and others have a fair supply in the US, but nowhere near on the scale that China do. And so if you're now thinking, okay, well, if I need to get chips and I need to get these things or technologies or whatever that might be, or any sort of hardware, whatever, I need to be thinking upwards of that. I need to be thinking, okay, well, rare earth supplies, okay, where do I go? And so the Middle East is a great place for that because it's close to China. It's looking at the future, and it's looking at how to look at import taxes and all these other things. And I mean, it's no secret, obviously, with the US tariffs and everything, people are always looking to diversify now. And so I think the Middle East is a strong place, and with its strong trade ties to Europe as well, this is a really great positioning for this side of the world.
Yeah, I think there's a global shift happening. I think even with our banking ventures, we are seeing that people are. I'm really surprised to say people are interested in the finance decoupling from US. Either it be US Treasury, US stocks, whatever the companies, because there's just so much volatility that they've come across. And more than the volatility, because I think stock market has always had its ups and downs. It's never been like a decade of just pure up. But I think there was like an underlying trust that people had, like in the governance of governments and all of those things. And I think with recent sort of changes, that got questioned a lot. And I think, hey, it's the world of trust. Finance at the very heart of it is the basis of trust. I pay you, trusting you would deliver. And if that trust kind of gets shaken down, and I think yes, people are. So that's something. Yeah, that notion is something we coming across as well. That people are more interested in Europe suddenly now. I think Europe is kind of into like, oh, I'm a grown-up kid now and not like a child anymore. And so, yes, definitely Middle East and Asia. I think those economies are popping up. So thank you for bringing that up, actually.
Yeah,
that's
of course.
Amazing. Catalina, thank you so much for being on the pod. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.